Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for coming. It is a great joy and pleasure to be here and having the opportunity to discuss the pros and cons of Bulgarians adopting the euro. And thank you very much, Rada Laykova, for making today's event possible. When I thought about what could I talk about, the article, "The euro is a Frankenstein currency," came to my mind. In this article from August last year, I took Mary Shelley's famous book Frankenstein and compared the creation of this Frankenstein monster with the creation of a single European currency. And you find the article free for download on the internet. However, yesterday I decided to present you a different perspective, because after I landed at Sofia airport, I bumped into a very, very nice taxi driver. And he showed me around and told me a lot about your national hero, Vasilevsky. And because I cannot read Bulgarian language, he gave me a translation on his iPhone, and there was a big headline, and it said, "Freedom or Death." And I'm very fascinated by the story of Vasilevsky and his achievements as a freedom fighter. And I thought I should remind you that becoming a member of the European Union and adopting the euro is giving up your freedom. And I wonder what Vasilevsky might say to you if you could ask him today whether or not he would be in favor of you joining the European Union and adopting the single currency. In my remarks, I will give you 4 major reasons why Bulgaria should not adopt the euro, and I would like to remind you of Switzerland's approach to the European Union, which makes a lot of sense for Bulgaria as a kind of risk mitigation strategy in the likely event, or I may say in the highly likely event, of the European Union breaking up. I will base my recommendation on monetary theory considerations supported by some general political economic insights. My recommendations also consider the specific economic and financial situation that Bulgaria would have as a member of the European currency area. And of course, my remarks are driven by the goal of supporting the economic foundations that bring sustained economic growth, employment, happiness and prosperity to Bulgaria. And right at the beginning, I think I should let you know that I'm, as a free market-oriented libertarian economist, very much in favor of deconstructing the European Union, reducing it to a free trade zone and ending the monopoly status of the euro currency, thereby creating a free market in money in Europe. I hope these introductory remarks help you to better understand my thoughts and recommendation. And to set the ball rolling, I would like to point out that membership of the European Union does not necessarily mean that a new member country must adopt the euro. While under the Maastricht Treaty, EU member states, they are formally required to introduce the euro currency once they meet certain economic criteria: low inflation, stable exchange rate, sound public finances. Several EU member countries have succeeded in steering clear of this requirement. For instance, the United Kingdom became a member of the European Union in 1973, and when the UK joined the EU, it negotiated an opt-out, namely not adopting the euro, retaining their British pound. And when the British left the European Union in 2020, that was the so-called Brexit, the UK hadn't replaced the British pound with the euro. The second example I would like to highlight is Denmark. Denmark also joined the European Union in 1973, and Denmark also got an opt-out. It has continued to use its own currency, the Danish kroner. And in a referendum, I think it was in 2000, the majority of Danish voters choose not to adopt the euro. And my third example is Sweden. Sweden joined the EU in 1995, and it also negotiated an opt-out from adopting the euro. And in 2003, they had a referendum and 56% of the Swedish people decided not to adopt the euro. And so the Swedish krona is still the official currency of Sweden. In all three countries, people have not been willing to transfer the control of their money to the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. They all wish to maintain their monetary sovereignty. The decision of the people in these countries should make you think, as all three countries have a long, independent and successful history. All were monarchies. Nowadays they are constitutional monarchies. And so the British, the Danes and the Swedes may have retained a kind of long-term oriented perspective, are not easily carried away by fashions and short-sighted concepts. Before I present my reasons why Bulgaria should not adopt the euro, you may be interested in whether I could give you any reason that speak in favor of Bulgaria joining the European single currency. I can give you two reasons, and I will refute them right away. The first reason is using a single currency makes sense. If everyone uses the same money, the productive power of money is best utilized, is optimized. It's a fantastic thing if all people use the same money. The optimal number of currencies in this world on our planet Earth is one. However, this conclusion is only valid if the single currency represents good money, not bad money. And I will argue that the euro is not good money, but rather bad money. The second reason is, one could argue, for countries with a fiat currency that is worse than the euro, joining the single currency area makes sense. And indeed, this conclusion sounds convincing at first glance. You get rid of your bad fiat currency and get a slightly better fiat currency. At second glance, however, one must consider the following. A country can only adopt the euro if its currency has inflated in line with the euro inflation in the 2 years before joining. However, if a country fulfills this admission criterion, also in line with other criteria, it obviously has a currency that is as good as bad as the euro. And so why should you adopt the euro? That said, one can only refer to the first reason for a possible justification for adopting the euro. However, I will show you now that the argument, or the reason number one, does not hold any water, as the euro is not good money, but bad money. And now I come to my four reasons why Bulgaria has good reasons not to adopt the euro. The first reason, the euro is an unsound fiat currency. It causes many severe economic and ethical problems, such as inflation, financial and economic crises. Well, I guess you know what money is. Money is the universally accepted means of exchange. Most people in Bulgaria use the lev. In Germany, most people use the euro. What is fiat money, is my question. Well, fiat money has three characteristics. First and foremost, fiat money is literally created out of thin air. Whenever central banks or commercial banks extend a loan to a producer, to a private household, to the government, they effectively issue fiat money. It's created out of thin air. The second defining characteristic of fiat money is that it is dematerialized money. Fiat money exists as colorful paper tickets and as bits and bytes on computer hard drives, representing a media that can be increased at any time in any politically desirable amount. And the third characteristic, fiat money results from states' monopolization of money production. State-sponsored central banks hold the exclusive privilege of producing so-called fiat central bank money, which is then used by commercial banks for producing fiat commercial bank money. Now you may ask, so what? Well, fiat money is not harmless. In fact, it harbors serious economic and ethical flaws. Chief among them is fiat money is inflationary, as you know. Prices of goods and services go up, typical for fiat currencies, because fiat currencies are increased by the central bank relentlessly. Moreover, the issuance of fiat money causes cycles of boom and bust. Initially, you get a increase in economic activity once new money gets into the economic system, but sooner or later this boom turns into a bust. And then in a fiat money system, the burden of government debt accumulates relentlessly. More and more debt comes into the system, and sooner or later countries are getting over-indebted. For instance, as you remember, in the Maastricht Treaty it says that the government should not have debt outstanding of more than 60% of GDP. The euro area average is 90%. Italy is close to 140%. France is at 112%. Germany is still at 62%. But the crazy government in Berlin is now going to issue 1 billion of new debt, and that will bring the German debt to GDP ratio close to 90%. So it's a nightmare, it's terrible, but this is going to happen in a fiat currency system. And as I know, in Bulgaria you have government debt less than 25%, so you did actually a pretty good job. I'm sure once you are in the euro area, your politicians will issue more and more debt, put more taxes on you to pay for that debt, so it's a pretty obvious outcome what the euro will do to your fiscal discipline. And of course fiat money paves the way for government expansion, because if you have fiat money you can create it at any time in any desirable amount. Governments will issue new debt and start funding all kinds of projects. The government will get bigger and bigger, and corruption will come, and all these bad side effects. And of course fiat money affords governments a dangerously easy means to finance wars. Far simpler than in a monetary regime where commodities such as gold or silver serve as money. You can see that with the Americans. They can find any military adventure just by issuing new dollars. And that the same is now happening in the European Union. As you know, they want to spend more on military equipment. They want to make you think we have to prepare for war. You see on this chart the short-term interest rate in the euro area from 2000 until January 2025. The black line is the European Central Bank interest rate, and the red line is the real interest rate. That is the nominal interest rate minus inflation. And as you can see, this red line is deep into negative territory, and that means the people in the euro area get an interest rate that is lower than the inflation rate, and that means your money gets debased. Your savings are getting destroyed. And this is what is coming to Bulgaria once you adopt the single currency, because in particular the large countries have become so indebted that the European Central Bank will push interest rates back to zero or even below at some point. Inflation will go up and your savings will be destroyed. The second argument is this: the chances are relatively high that the European Union and the euro won't survive. Both are globalist creatures, concepts of the past. The euro is political money. It is a key instrument to create a centralized Europe by abolishing the national sovereignty of its member states. That is why anyone joining the EU is required to adopt the euro, relinquishing its monetary sovereignty. The EU itself is what I would call a globalist creature, an institutional setup to centralize and increase political power. And the founding motivation for the euro dates back to around the collapse of the system of Bretton Woods in the early 1970s. Today, however, we must ask, will the euro and the EU lead the people of Europe into a bright future? And I have my doubts. For expanding centralized state power simply doesn't work. We have seen this on many occasions in the past. Just think of the collapse of the socialist European countries in the late 1980s, early 1990s. And now we become witnesses that the so-called semi-socialist welfare state in the West is breaking down. In the US, things will become different. There is a big change, and I would call that the second American Revolution. an attempt to fight back the deep state. A growing number of people understand that it is wise to reduce and disempower the state as we know it today and revive individual liberty and freedom, favoring smaller political units over larger political units. Just think about the likely scenario in which the people in the European nation states start reclaiming their freedom and liberty from Brussels. It would most likely be the end of the European Union as we know it today. And then the question arises, what about the euro? Can it survive without the EU as we know it today? Personally, I don't think so. From my viewpoint, therefore, joining the euro carries significant risks for Bulgaria, as it would effectively mean exchanging its own national currency for the euro, a currency that comes with great risk of disintegrating going forward. In other words, retaining your national currency that is not adopting the euro is a reasonable approach. You benefit from the EU in terms of getting access to free trade and free capital movement in Europe, and at the same time shield yourself from the inevitable serious problems that come with the euro currency. Now my third reason, Bulgaria will lose its national monetary sovereignty with inflation, interest rates and business cycles being dictated from outside. Adopting the euro means that the Bulgarian people effectively give up their national monetary sovereignty. Bulgarians will hand over the management of their money and thus a great deal of their economic and financial destiny to a supranational body, the European Central Bank in Frankfurt. And the ECB is de facto beyond parliamentary control of the nation state. The Bulgarian Central Bank governor would be one among 27 ECB Governing Council members. Currently, the ECB Governing Council is made up of 6 executive board members. They have a permanent voting right, plus 20 national central bank governors, and they have a rotating voting right. And what is more, the ECB Governing Council is divided into 2 groups. The 5 largest countries, that's the first group, they have 4 votes. The rest, the second group, 11 votes. Bulgaria would be in the second group as a small country. Both groups have rotating voting rights, meaning that Bulgaria would not participate in all ECB decisions. As a member of the second group, Bulgaria would also have fewer voting rights compared to larger countries. And having said that, Bulgaria gives up its monetary sovereignty when it adopts the euro, and monetary conditions, be that inflation, be that interest rates, will literally be dictated from the ECB in Frankfurt, with Bulgaria having very little, if any, impact on ECB monetary policy. Generally speaking, there is unequal treatment between small and large euro area member states. For instance, you remember that, I guess, following its debt crisis in 2011, Greece was put under severe pressure from large euro area member states, effectively placed under the dictate of the EU, and the ECB, forced into recession, had to accept financial aid packages, undergo debt restructuring. While Greece, a relatively small country, lost its sovereignty. Italy and France, relatively large countries, are being treated more favorably. In mid-2022, the European Central Bank established a so-called backstop. It's a tool to counter any unwanted, politically unwanted widenings of bond spreads among the Eurozone countries. It was essentially, or is essentially, meant to keep yields on Italian government bonds artificially low. However, it is likely that the French bond yields also are artificially supported by the ECB safety net. As larger countries are treated more favorably than smaller countries by ECB monetary policy making, it goes without saying that smaller countries like Bulgaria will bear disproportionately the costs of, in particular, fiscal mismanagement and corruption in larger countries, which is certainly not in the interest of the people in Bulgaria. Now I've given you 4 reasons which I think make a good case for Bulgaria not adopting the euro. And on a final note, I would like to outline two proposals that, in my opinion, would be best for the people in Bulgaria. Number one, Bulgaria does not adopt the euro, and the second recommendation is Bulgaria creates a free market in money in Bulgaria. Briefly, referring to the first recommendation, Bulgaria does not adopt the euro. Bulgaria does not introduce the euro, retaining its own currency, thereby following the example of the UK, Denmark and Sweden. And these countries did good. There's no reason not being in favor of such a proposal. You have access to markets in the EU and at the same time retain your monetary sovereignty, protect yourself from negative consequences and risks that would come with adopting the euro. The second strategy would be Bulgaria does not officially introduce the euro, rather it allows citizens and businesses to use either the lev or the euro just as they wish. It's a free choice. In addition to the advantages of the first recommendation, Bulgarians would have the freedom to choose the currency they want to use based on factors like stability, acceptance and trust. This would promote individual freedom of the Bulgarian people, as people could select currencies that align with their preferences and financial goals without being forced to use a state-sponsored currency. An additional remark in this context, I would like to remind you of Switzerland's approach. Switzerland, a pretty small country that is economically and politically very successful, very wealthy, very nice and friendly people, and it has decided to remain outside the European Union, yet having relatively close ties with the EU. They have got their monetary sovereignty. The Swiss have free movement of persons in and out of the EU. They have got trade agreements. Switzerland has access to the EU's single market for goods and services. Switzerland is a member of the European Free Trade Association, which is a separate entity from the European Union, and so forth. As problems build up in the EU, Switzerland's approach vis-à-vis the euro might become increasingly attractive to Bulgaria as an exit option, especially so if Bulgaria retains its national currency. For then it is relatively easy and relatively costless for Bulgarian people to leave the European Union, as the UK has done in 2020. Bulgaria should create a free market in money. Bulgaria introduces a free market in money. What does that mean? Well, it's very simple. It means that everyone will have the freedom to choose the money that best serves their purpose, and that everyone has the freedom to offer goods to others who may voluntarily demand them as money. To create a free market in money, all tax and regulatory barriers to potential monetary candidates such as gold, silver, Bitcoin or other crypto units must be removed, such as, say, capital and value-added taxes. In practice, it means that Bulgarians would be free to conduct their transactions with lev, euro, US dollar, gold, silver, Bitcoin or any other type of media they consider good money. A free market for money in Bulgaria, successfully implemented, could attract international human talents and capital to your country. Bulgaria could become a monetary free trade zone, the first of its kind in the world, adding to economic growth and thus people's prosperity and, let's not forget, individual freedom as your national hero fought for. Thank you very much for your attention.